Hi, welcome back to another science class here at Bafundi Academy. In this particular class, we are going to learn about classification of animals still. You remember that in the previous class, we introduced classification of animals. We saw that animals are majorly classified into two groups, invertebrates and vertebrates. We said that vertebrates have a backbone, while invertebrates do not have the backbone. So that's what separates the two. And then we also saw that vertebrates are divided into cold-blooded animals and warm-blooded animals. And then we looked into the examples of warm-blooded animals where we saw the mammals and the birds. So in this particular class, we are going just to continue with where we left in the previous class, which is classification of animals. So we've seen the warm-blooded animals. Now we are going to look at the cold-blooded animals. So the cold-blooded animals, these are animals whose body temperature is not constant. Their body temperature changes with the temperature of the environment. And we said that warm-blooded animals, on the other hand, have a constant body temperature that doesn't conform to that of the environment. So the change, since we've said that cold-blooded animals do not have a constant body temperature, their body temperature conforms to that of their surrounding environment. It changes according to their surrounding environment, their habitats. And the first group of animals that we are going to look under the cold-blooded animals are the amphibians. Amphibians are example of cold-blooded animals. And we are going to see their characteristics. So the first characteristic of an amphibian is that they have moist skin without scale. So these amphibians, since they have a moist skin, some of them, such as frogs, they breathe through that moist skin. And then they reproduce by laying eggs. We said that reproduction is a characteristic of animals. So amphibians, they reproduce by laying eggs in water. And then they have a form of fertilization, which is an external form of fertilization. Okay, and this fertilization, which is the process of the male reproductive cell combining or fusing with the female reproductive cell, occurs in water. So most amphibians, they live partly in water and on land. So sometimes you'll find that when, for example, frogs, you will get that sometimes they are on land and sometimes they are in water. And they are mainly in water when they want to reproduce, because they need that to happen in water. And then there is a difference between the young ones and the mature animals under the group of amphibians, in that the young ones majorly breathe through their gills, and then the mature amphibians, they breathe through their lungs. But there is an exception whereby frogs also breathe through their moist skin. So examples of amphibians include frogs, salamanders, toads, and newts. So these are animals that you've seen. I'm very sure you've seen a frog, you've seen a salamander. Maybe the name is unique, maybe the name is new, but you've seen a salamander. A chameleon is also an amphibian, which you've also seen. So the next group of animals under the cold-blooded animals are the fish. So fish, the first characteristic is that they have fins, and they use fins for movement. They use the fins to propel them in water. So they move from one location to the next in search of food, in search of mates, by using these fins to propel them in water. And then their bodies are covered with scales. So these scales protect their body. of course. And these scales also is a form of survival in water. Then fish, they also produce by laying eggs, and then these eggs are fertilized externally. They breathe through gills. You've seen maybe, let's say your mom comes back home with a good fried fish. With just close to the eyes, there are always gills, and those gills are what the fish use to breathe. And they spend all of their lives in water. So when they are removed from water, of course they die, because we humans, we feed on the fish. Examples of fish include we have Nile perch, tilapia, trout, shark. Those are just examples of fish. You can also go further and check in the internet the various types of fish that we have, both in our lakes, in our rivers, and even in our oceans. The next group of animals that we are now going to learn about are the invertebrates. We said that animals, we've grouped them into two major groups, the vertebrates and the invertebrates. We've seen the example, we've seen the vertebrates, that we have the warm-blooded animals and the cold-blooded animals, and we've seen the classes of those particular animals in those two groups. Now we are going also to learn about the invertebrates. And the invertebrates, these are animals, of course, without a backbone. And they include animals such as insects. So insects such as houseflies, the bees, the butterflies, the termites, and even the fleas and the lice. These are animals which do not have a backbone. So they are called invertebrates. And these insects, one thing about them, one characteristic is that their body is divided into three major regions, which is the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. So that's how they are divided. Their body is divided into those three parts. And then most of these insects, they have they have wings, and these wings, they use them for movement. And then they reproduce, which is another characteristics of animals. They reproduce by laying eggs, which of course undergo through a cycle, and that cycle they mature and they give rise to young ones. And these also, some of the insects, they have antennae or feelers, which they use to let's say they use they use these antennae or feelers like to detect the changes in the environment, the different changes that occur in the environment. If there is a threat in the environment, they use these antennae or feelers to detect that. And then we have another class of invertebrates, which are called worms, and there are different types of worms. We have the earthworms, the tapeworms, and even but the roundworms are not type of worms. They just have the name roundworms, but the roundworms are under another group of organisms which are called fungi. Then we have centipedes and millipedes. These are also invertebrates, and you've seen a centipede. It has its body is segmented into several sections or segments, and they protect themselves. Particularly centipedes, they protect themselves by stinging. So if you threaten them, if they feel that you've threatened them, they sting. But millipedes, on the other hand, if you threaten them, they coil. Okay, that's the difference between a centipede and a millipede. And then they have, of course, multiple limbs that they use for movement. And then we have ticks, scorpions, mites, and even spiders. These form this group of invertebrates. Their body is divided into two parts. Unlike the insects, their body is divided into two parts, and they have 4 pairs of legs. But they do not fly. They do not have wings, so they do not fly. And then we have the snails and the slugs. The difference between the snail and the slug is that the snail has a shell, but the slug doesn't have a shell. So that's one of the differences between the snails and the slugs. So these are some of the animals that you will still even study as you further your education. And then the last group of animals that are under cold-blooded animals are called the reptiles. So reptiles, they have, of course, they have their characteristics. Reptiles are like a snake is a reptile, a crocodile is a reptile. So they also reproduce by laying eggs. A crocodile will reproduce by laying eggs. A snake will reproduce by laying eggs, which is then fertilized, of course. So after it is fertilized, of course, it hatches into that young one that then matures. Their body is also covered by dry scales. So a crocodile, its body is covered with a dry scale, and they breathe through their lungs. And you realize that reptiles also survive both in water and on land. So a crocodile, you'll see it partly in water and partly on land. So that's how also they survive. Examples include lizards, the snake, the turtles, and even the tortoise. So in this particular class, we've just seen another group of animals which are called the cold-blooded animals. We've seen that cold-blooded animals do not have a constant body temperature. Their body temperature changes according to that of the environment. So they adapt to the temperature of the environment. We've seen the various examples of these cold-blooded animals. We've seen a group fish, amphibians, we've seen reptiles, we've seen the different, we've also seen the invertebrates. And the invertebrates, we've seen insects, we've seen the worms, and so on and so forth. So I implore you to go and even search more, read more about these animals, this group of animals, the vertebrates and the invertebrates. And if you have any question concerning this particular class, you can post that particular question in our discussion forum where we'll be able to assist you. So thank you and see you in the next class.